Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we have some interesting news about some further adjustments coming to the game, hopefully soon. And this is actually something I'm really excited about because it's something I've been kind of advocating for a while, and that is buffs. So I think, nerfs are great and needed at times, but one thing I think the game could be doing a better job of is buffing its kind of underplayed or not very good cards. We have a lot less cards in Marvel Snap than other traditional card games, so it makes the most sense that there really shouldn't be any filler. Obviously, some cards are always going to be better than other cards, but especially when it comes to some of the early 1 and 2 drop cards in the game, it feels like there are just kind of a handful of them that see the most play, and a lot of the other ones are just kind of not good enough to compete. So we got some questions from the developer team answered about this, and it's pretty dope. So let's take a look here. Question: how are the stats in the state of 1 and 2 cost cards? I ask this because I only seem to see 1 drops such as Sunspot, Zero, Iceman, or Korg, the only 2 drops being Armor, Scorpion, and Lizard. Glenn responds: the variation is better than you describe, but there's plenty of room for improvement. We have some solutions we like, and you'll hear more about them soon. So yeah, I will say there is a little bit more variation than described there, but it is also true that it does feel like the early game cards that are effective and see a lot of play are kind of grouped up into a very small amount of cards, with, I'd say, like Sunspot probably being the by far most common and popular 1-drop in the game. There are other good cards, of course, but I do think the game could really benefit from having more options, gives people more variety in the decks they build, and just gives people more reason to use a lot of these cards in their collection. Then the other question and answer here is the part that makes me hopeful that we will be seeing some of these changes very, very soon, as early as next week with the balance patch. And this question is about the balance patch coming next week. Is the upcoming balance patch that was mentioned by the developers just for Thanos and Shuri decks, or will there be other balances as well? And Steven says there are more adjustments than just those 2 decks. So my guess here is that we are going to be seeing more buffs. We got more buffs last patch, and I think that was great, even though not all of them were like the craziest buffs in the world. I know I've tried out Spider-Woman a little bit more and Dagger a little bit more, so I really do think any buff is kind of a good buff. And I'm excited to see what this patch has. I know we're all pretty sick of the current meta. It's not the most fun, to say the least, so I am hoping that things really open up for some more experimentation with different decks, different archetypes, and buffing some cards will be a great way to enable that. Before we close it out here, though, I figured it would make sense to kind of go through the existing 1 and 2 drops to see, what would be nice for them to change and buff. So taking a look here, there are definitely some that I would like to see. Elektra definitely being one of the big ones. I think Elektra is actually a pretty sweet card with a pretty good effect. It just sucks that she is 1 power. If Killmonger can be a 3 for 3 and destroy all the opponent's 1-drops, destroying 1-drop in 1 lane, I think, is deserving of a bit more power to make her a bit more competitive after getting out of the initial Pool 1 or Pool 2 experience. So I'd like to see this one go to 2 power at the very least. I think it would definitely result in her seeing a lot more play, and it would be kind of a more interesting way to maybe counter Sunspot. Another card I think would be cool to see buffed in some way is Angel. I'm not really sure how you'd buff this card because it's hard to buff the numbers on some of these 1-drops, but I do think this is a very neat effect. It's just not really good enough for the decks it wants to be in, which are destroy decks. So I'm not really sure how this card could be buffed, but it would be nice to see something to make this card a little bit more viable. Other than that, I think a lot of the 1-drops are actually pretty decent here. The Watcher, I think this one could be really cool if it's just a start of the game effect. It's probably still going to be very niche if that was the case, but this might actually enable it to see a little bit of play at the very least. 2-drops are honestly the area I think has a lot of room for more improvement, and I think a lot of that can be done by just upping the stats of some of these underperforming cards. Black Widow's pretty sweet, but 1 power for the 2 costs. I mean, yeah, the effect can be nice, and it takes up a spot on your opponent's board, maybe helps pump your Darkhawk, but I really think this card could benefit from being a 2/2, so it's a little bit more competitive in the 2-drop spot. I feel that way about a lot of cards, actually. Luke Cage is another one of these cards where really sweet card, but I think it really doesn't necessarily need the 1 power, given its very conditional and specific effect. Forge, honestly, another one here where it's essentially 2/3 worth of stats, which is, yeah, you're spreading it out, but I think this card could also benefit from a stat bump. And we saw this before with things like Hazmat and Dagger. So I do hope that they're willing to do that with some of the other cards here. Wolverine's another one we saw buffed recently, and I really liked how they did this buff. Made the card a lot more interesting and see a lot more play, so hopefully we can get more stuff like that. Baron Moto, this is one that someone actually specifically asked about, and I think there are a variety of ways you could make this effect a bit more interesting or a bit more viable, because I think it's cool, but it just doesn't really justify a slot in any decks right now. Probably the one I'm hoping for most is my girl Quake here. I think Quake is super fun and really isn't as bad as a lot of people say she is. I do think her condition being limited to the middle location is really, really rough, and I would like to see either this stipulation removed entirely, where it's just Quake shuffles no matter where you play her, or if you have to leave a restriction on her, it should make it so she can be played on the left or the right lane to swap the locations, and then if you don't want to swap, you can put her in the middle. That way, it's less likely you're going to get screwed over by a bad middle location, basically totally invalidating the text on this card. And then last, and certainly not least, Angela. I think we should revert Angela. She was an absolute powerhouse in beta and at global release, but the game has really stepped up its max power a lot since then, and I think Angela going back to 1 power would really help enable some of these zoo strategies, some of these early board aggressive strategies that have a hard time keeping up with all of the big point slam power stuff that's prominent in the meta right now. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'd like to hear from you. What are some cards in the 1 and 2 drop slot you would like to see buffed to be more viable? I think this is a really great thing, and I really hope we see some cool, interesting buffs in the patch coming hopefully early next week. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.